What happens when Britain's most beloved comic actor loses his composure on live morning television? It only took 33 seconds for Rowan Atkinson to go from polite guest to furiously being kicked off the Lorraine Kelly Show after an exchange that left viewers across the UK absolutely stunned. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation, make sure you subscribe to this channel for daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals and the most shocking moments caught on camera. Last night's broadcast of the Lorraine Kelly Show was meant to be a light-hearted celebration of comedy, British entertainment, heritage, and artistic achievement. Rowan Atkinson, the legendary actor known worldwide for his iconic portrayals of Mr. Bean and Blackadder, arrived at the ITV studios in central London, looking characteristically reserved and understated in his appearance, wearing a simple dark suit. The morning show set was bright and welcoming as always, bathed in the warm lighting that British audiences have come to associate with their morning routine. With Lorraine's signature purple sofa ready to host what everyone in the production team expected would be a charming, pleasant conversation about Rowan's storied career, his creative process, and his thoughts on modern comedy and entertainment. The studio audience was buzzing with palpable excitement, many of them lifelong fans who had grown up watching his work, eager to see the brilliant man behind some of Britain's most cherished and internationally recognized comedy characters. Lorraine Kelly herself greeted Rowan with her trademark Scottish warmth and genuine enthusiasm, her smile bright and welcoming as she gestured for him to join her on the famous sofa. "Rowan, it is absolutely wonderful to have you here this morning," she began warmly, beaming at him as he settled carefully into the purple sofa, adjusting his jacket. "You are truly a national treasure, someone who has given us so much joy over the years. Mr. Bean, Blackadder, Johnny English, not the 9 o'clock news. You've given us so many unforgettable laughs over the decades. How does it feel to have created characters that have brought genuine joy to literally millions of people around the entire world?" Rowan smiled modestly, his demeanor quiet, measured, and thoughtful as always, presenting a stark contrast to the wildly physical comedy characters he's become famous for portraying on screen. "It's very gratifying indeed, Lorraine. When you create something, particularly in comedy, you never really know how it's going to resonate with people or whether it will connect at all. To see these characters connect with audiences across different cultures, different languages, different generations, it's quite humbling, really. More than I ever expected when we started." The audience applauded enthusiastically and warmly, many people on their feet showing their appreciation. Joy Behar had been nodding along enthusiastically. The conversation continued flowing naturally and engagingly for several more minutes, covering various fascinating topics. They discussed Rowan's famous physical comedy techniques and how he developed the distinctive walk and mannerisms of Mr. Bean. Lorraine asked about his most embarrassing moments on set, and Rowan shared a genuinely funny story about a stunt gone wrong that had the audience roaring with laughter. They talked about his love of cars, his engineering background from Oxford, and how that analytical mind helps him construct comedy with mathematical precision. "You know, Rowan," Lorraine said warmly at one point, "what I find so fascinating about you is that you're nothing like your characters in real life. Mr. Bean barely speaks, yet here you are so articulate and thoughtful. How do you make that transformation?" Rowan smiled appreciatively. "Well, that's the joy of acting and performance, isn't it? Comedy is often about creating a character who's very different from yourself. Mr. Bean allowed me to explore pure physical comedy, childlike behavior, situations where words aren't necessary. It's quite liberating, actually. For nearly 10 full minutes, it was exactly what a morning chat show appearance should be. Entertaining, enlightening, warm, comfortable, and full of interesting stories that gave viewers a genuine glimpse into the life and mind of a true comedy legend." The audience laughed heartily at the funny anecdotes, applauded enthusiastically the achievements, and seemed genuinely delighted to be in the presence of such a respected beloved performer. Everything seemed perfectly pleasant, professional, and successful. Then Lorraine shifted gears quite deliberately, her expression becoming noticeably more serious, focused, and journalistic. Rowan, I want to ask you about something quite important you said in a recent interview that's caused quite a bit of discussion and heated debate in the media and online. You suggested that modern comedy has become too sanitized, too afraid to offend anyone or push any boundaries. You said that political correctness is killing genuine humor and stifling true creativity. That's quite a strong and controversial statement to make publicly, isn't it? Rowan's expression became visibly more guarded, his relaxed posture straightening slightly as he clearly sensed the change in tone and direction. I don't think it's strong or controversial, so much as it's honest observation based on decades working in the industry at the highest levels. Comedy has always pushed boundaries, challenged social norms, made people uncomfortable sometimes. When you start creating rigid rules about what can and absolutely cannot be joked about ever, you fundamentally change the nature of comedy itself. You kill what makes it vital. Lorraine leaned forward deliberately, her journalistic instincts clearly fully engaged now. But Rowan, don't you think there's a fundamental difference between pushing boundaries in clever ways and causing genuine harm to real people? Some of the old comedy shows, the ones from the 70s and 80s that you grew up with, they had jokes that were explicitly racist, blatantly sexist, openly homophobic. Surely you're not suggesting we should go back to that kind of harmful humor? That's not what I'm saying at all, and I think you know that, Rowan replied, his voice remaining outwardly calm, but taking on a noticeably firmer edge. There's an important difference between comedy that punches down at genuinely vulnerable groups and comedy that challenges ideas, assumptions, and power structures. What concerns me deeply is when we can't distinguish between the two anymore, when everything becomes potentially offensive and therefore completely off limits. Lorraine's eyebrows raised skeptically. But who gets to decide what's punching down and what's challenging ideas? Because often, what one person sees as clever satire, another person experiences as deeply hurtful mockery of their identity. Don't the people who are actually the subject of the jokes get a meaningful say in whether it's harmful to them? Rowan shifted noticeably in his seat, clearly feeling the conversation was becoming more adversarial than he'd anticipated or prepared for. Of course, people's feelings matter and should be considered. But comedy also has to have freedom to explore difficult topics, to make us uncomfortable sometimes, to challenge our assumptions. If we only make jokes about things everyone unanimously agrees are acceptable, that's not really comedy anymore. That's just pleasant, sanitized entertainment. So you think people are too sensitive now? Is that your position? Lorraine pressed, her tone sharpening noticeably and deliberately. That they should just accept being the butt of jokes, even if those jokes perpetuate harmful stereotypes or make them feel actively excluded from society? I think there's an important difference between being appropriately sensitive to genuine harm and being so hypersensitive that absolutely nothing can be said without someone taking offense, Rowan replied, his voice rising slightly in volume. And I think we're veering dangerously toward the latter in modern culture, to everyone's detriment. Lorraine sat back, her expression openly skeptical now. Rowan, with all due respect, and I mean this genuinely, isn't that quite easy for you to say from your position? As a successful white British man, you've never been on the receiving end of comedy that systematically diminishes your identity or makes you feel less than human. Don't you think you might have a significant blind spot here? The question landed heavily and uncomfortably. The audience went noticeably quieter, sensing the tension rising. Rowan's jaw tightened visibly, his face beginning to flush. I beg your pardon? Are you seriously suggesting I don't have a right to an informed opinion on comedy because of my gender and my race? I'm suggesting your perspective might be inherently limited by your privilege and life experience, Lorraine said firmly, not backing down at all. You've benefited from a system that's always welcomed you with open arms, always given you opportunities freely. Maybe you're not the best person to decide what's too sensitive when it comes to jokes about marginalized groups who haven't had your advantages. Rowan's expression hardened considerably, his eyes narrowing. That's an incredibly reductive and frankly insulting way to dismiss someone's views wholesale, Lorraine. I've spent 40 years studying comedy, practicing it professionally, thinking deeply about its role in society. To suggest my opinions are automatically invalid or worthless because of my demographic characteristics is intellectually dishonest and, frankly, quite offensive. I didn't say invalid or worthless, Lorraine clarified, though her tone remained challenging and sharp, almost accusatory. I said limited by experience and perspective. There's a significant and important difference between those things. Surely you can acknowledge that your personal experiences aren't universal and that others from different backgrounds might see things quite differently than you do? Of course they're not universal, Rowan replied tersely, his irritation becoming increasingly clear in his voice and body language. Nobody's experiences are universal. That's obvious. But that doesn't mean we can only speak knowledgeably about our own narrow demographic lane or identity category. By that restrictive logic, I couldn't have played characters from different backgrounds, different social classes, different nationalities, different time periods. Comedy and art would be impossibly limited, narrow, and quite frankly, boring. Lorraine leaned forward again aggressively, her voice taking on even more confrontational edge, her eyes narrowing. Creating a fictional character with empathy and research is completely different from making jokes at the expense of real people with real struggles and real pain. You know that fundamental distinction. And frankly, Rowan, some of your old sketches from earlier in your career wouldn't fly at all today. There are bits in your early work from the 80s that are genuinely problematic by modern standards. Don't you think there's a very good reason audiences have evolved beyond that kind of insensitive humor? Rowan's face flushed, noticeably red now, his composure slipping further. Problematic. There's that vague, overused word again that means everything and nothing. Everything is problematic now, according to someone, somewhere. Do you know what's actually problematic in my view? This pervasive, insidious idea that we should sanitize all art and comedy to the point where it offends absolutely nobody under any circumstances whatsoever? That's not progress toward a better society, Lorraine. That's creative death. That's the end of meaningful, artistic expression and genuine social commentary. So you'd rather go back to comedy that actively hurt real people? That made minority groups feel unwelcome, mocked, and systematically dehumanized? Lorraine challenged directly and sharply. That's genuinely your position? You want to go backwards? That's a completely false choice, and you know it. Rowan shot back firmly, his voice rising noticeably now, his calm demeanor visibly cracking. You're creating a straw man argument instead of engaging honestly. I'm not advocating for cruel comedy or humor that dehumanizes anyone or any group. I'm advocating for artistic freedom in comedy. The freedom to take creative risks, to sometimes fail and learn, to explore controversial and difficult topics without being immediately condemned or canceled by internet mobs. The studio had gone very quiet now by this point, the tension absolutely palpable and uncomfortable. The friendly, warm atmosphere from the beginning of the interview had completely evaporated, replaced by genuine hostility and confrontation. Lorraine's voice sharpened even further. But Rowan, you're a wealthy, incredibly successful comedian who's never faced real consequences for anything you've said in your entire privileged career. From where you're sitting in your position of comfort and privilege, of course you want unlimited freedom without responsibility. But what about young comedians from diverse backgrounds who are trying to break through in an industry that's historically excluded them? Don't they deserve a comedy landscape that doesn't constantly mock and belittle who they fundamentally are? Nobody is constantly mocking anyone in modern comedy, Rowan replied heatedly, his voice growing louder and more forceful. And this persistent idea that I've never faced consequences is absolutely absurd and divorced from reality. Every comedian, regardless of success level, faces harsh criticism, brutal rejection, professional failure, scathing reviews. Success doesn't magically insulate you from that harsh reality. I've had shows canceled, projects rejected, performances criticized. That's part of the job, part of the craft. But it does insulate you from systemic marginalization and structural discrimination. Lorraine pressed hard, refusing to back down. You've never had to worry that a comedy club won't book you because of your race or gender or sexuality. You've never had to see yourself and people like you mocked on stage night after night with impunity. You've never had to fight for a seat at the table. That's privilege, Rowan, whether you want to acknowledge and admit it or not. Rowan's eyes flashed with genuine anger now, his face reddening further. So because I'm a white man, my professional views on comedy and artistic freedom are automatically suspect and invalid? Is that really the intellectually bankrupt argument you're making on your show right now, in front of all these people and cameras? I'm making the argument that when you complain loudly and publicly about political correctness ruining comedy, you're essentially complaining about no longer being able to make certain jokes at other people's expense without facing any pushback or criticism, Lorraine said firmly and accusingly, her voice sharp. And I think you should be honest about that reality, instead of hiding behind free speech arguments. The audience gasped audibly, clearly shocked by the directness. Several people shifted very uncomfortably in their seats, looking at each other with wide eyes. Rowan stared at Lorraine for a long, heavy, uncomfortable moment, his expression cycling through shock, hurt, and pure fury. That is an outrageous and deeply offensive mischaracterization of my position and my motivations. You've completely and deliberately twisted what I said to make me look bad. Have I? Lorraine challenged directly, meeting his gaze. Because it sounds to me like you want comedy to go back to a time when you and people like you could say whatever you wanted without any consequences. When marginalized people just had to sit there quietly and take it. I want comedy to have genuine artistic freedom. Rowan's voice was genuinely loud now, projecting forcefully across the entire studio. I want comedians to be able to explore difficult subjects without constant fear of mob justice and career destruction. That's not the same as wanting to hurt people, and I deeply resent the implication. Then maybe you should think much more carefully about your public statements, Lorraine replied sharply, her voice equally loud. Because when you complain about political correctness in interviews, you're aligning yourself with people who use that exact phrase to justify genuinely harmful, bigoted behavior. Rowan stood up abruptly and suddenly, startling everyone in the studio. Several audience members actually gasped. I am not aligning myself with anyone or any movement. I am expressing my own, carefully considered views about comedy and censorship based on 4 decades of professional experience. And I'm not going to sit here one more second and be lectured condescendingly about privilege by someone who's also had an incredibly successful, lucrative career in broadcasting. Lorraine stood as well immediately, her face flushed bright with anger. My success doesn't mean I can't recognize systemic inequality when I see it, and it certainly doesn't mean I should stay silent when someone with your massive platform promotes ideas that could genuinely harm vulnerable people. Harm vulnerable people? Rowan's voice was incredulous, almost laughing with disbelief. I'm talking about comedy. I'm talking about art and creative freedom. I'm not promoting violence or discrimination or hatred. Comedy doesn't exist in a vacuum separate from society, Lorraine shot back loudly. Jokes shape culture. They reinforce or challenge harmful stereotypes. When you say political correctness is ruining comedy, you're telling marginalized people that their comfort and dignity matter less than your creative freedom. That's not what I'm saying at all, Rowan shouted, his calm demeanor completely gone now. You're putting words in my mouth. You're deliberately misrepresenting my position to make me look like some kind of bigot or extremist. I'm holding you accountable for the clear implications of your words, Lorraine replied, her voice shaking with intensity. If you can't handle being challenged on your privileged views, maybe you shouldn't express them in major public interviews. Rowan started removing his lapel microphone with visibly shaking hands, his anger fully apparent now. I can handle being challenged intellectually. What I absolutely can't handle is being strawmanned and personally attacked by someone who's supposed to be conducting a professional interview, not engaging in character assassination. Professional? Lorraine's laugh was sharp and bitter. You're the one who came on my show specifically to complain about political correctness. You're the one who can't handle hearing perspectives different from your comfortable worldview. I came here to discuss my career and my work, Rowan said coldly, now holding his microphone tightly in his trembling hand. Not to be ambushed with bad faith arguments and baseless accusations of privilege, as if that somehow invalidates everything I've said. Bad faith? Lorraine's eyes widened with indignation. I asked you to defend your publicly stated position on a controversial topic. That's not bad faith. That's basic journalism. That's what I do every day. It's not journalism when you deliberately twist everything someone says to fit your preconceived narrative, Rowan replied, his voice icy and controlled. It's activism disguised as journalism. It's using your platform to push an agenda, and I want absolutely no part of it. Lorraine's face went even redder, practically crimson now. How dare you? How dare you question my integrity like that? I have been a professional journalist for decades. I have integrity and standards. Just because I challenged you doesn't mean I'm twisting your words or pushing some hidden agenda. You've done nothing but twist my words since you brought this topic up, Rowan said, his voice steady but filled with contempt. And I'm completely done with this conversation. He started walking deliberately toward the studio exit. Lorraine called after him desperately, her voice sharp. Rowan, if you walk off this set right now, you're proving you can't handle criticism. You're proving you want to say controversial things without being questioned. Rowan stopped and turned back to face her, his expression hard. No, Lorraine. What I'm proving is that I have enough self-respect to leave when a conversation becomes hostile and dishonest. You weren't interested in understanding my position. You were interested in attacking it. I was interested in holding you accountable, Lorraine insisted loudly. Accountable for what exactly? Rowan demanded. For having an opinion about comedy? For thinking artists should have creative freedom? Those aren't crimes, Lorraine. For using your platform to undermine social progress, Lorraine shot back furiously. For making it harder for marginalized voices to be heard. That is absolutely ridiculous and intellectually dishonest, Rowan said, shaking his head in disbelief. Wanting artistic freedom for comedy doesn't undermine anyone. If anything, it creates more space for diverse voices, not less. Your logic is backwards. That's naive and privileged, Lorraine replied sharply. Freedom without responsibility is just privilege in action. Rowan's eyes narrowed dangerously. And censorship, dressed up as compassion, is still censorship. I'd rather be called naive than authoritarian. The word authoritarian seemed to hit Lorraine like a physical slap. Her voice went very cold. Get off my show, right now. If you're going to accuse me of authoritarianism for asking you tough questions, you can leave immediately. I'm already leaving, Rowan said, turning back toward the exit. I don't need your permission. This is my show, Lorraine called after him, her voice cracking. I'm telling you to leave. I'm kicking you off. Fine, Rowan replied without looking back. Consider me kicked off. I certainly won't be coming back. He walked off the set with quick, angry strides, still carrying his microphone. The cameras followed him all the way to the studio exit, capturing every single step. Lorraine stood on the set, her chest heaving, clearly trying desperately to compose herself. The studio audience sat in absolutely shocked silence, many with phones out recording. The production crew looked completely panicked. Lorraine finally sat back down heavily, looking at the camera with a strained expression. Well, she said, her voice shaking noticeably. That was completely unexpected. We'll be right back after this break. As the show cut to commercial, Rowan Atkinson pushed forcefully through the studio doors and disappeared from view, ending one of the most explosive talk show confrontations in recent British television history.